Let's have a look at Blender. If you haven't heard of it, Blender is a 3D application that is free and open source, and it is on par with some of the top selling 3D applications like Maya and 3ds Max. It has all these features like modeling, it has fantastic sculpting tools, it has liquid and smoke simulation, it can do animations, it can do keyframe both as well as nonlinear animations, it can do a whole bunch of other stuff. And the good news is we don't have to learn them all to be able to use and enjoy Blender. If you've been working with 3D for a while, Blender is something that'll cross your path every once in a while, and it's a really good idea to get used to it. In this episode, I'm going to show you how we can change clothing items or the fit of clothing items in Blender with pretty much the same example I had in my previous episode with the auto-fitted shirt here. So Blender has tools that Hexagon has, and it also has tools that ZBrush has, but it's completely free. So what I'd like to do is show you two examples here, how we can elongate the arms to about here, how we can make that happen with Blender, and also how to smooth in this underbust issue here. So right now the top looks as if it's spray painted onto the figure, and that's not really a natural look, and that happened because of the auto fit process. But it is a fairly easy fix. The problem with Blender is that it's not tightly integrated into Daz Studio, so we're going to have to do the export and the re-import manually to bring our changes in. So that's a little bit tricky, but it's one of those things. Stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Don't be discouraged if there's so much to take in. I'm merely giving you examples of, hey, these are the things that you can do. I'm not saying please do them all. It's pick whatever works for you and stick with that. If some application like Blender does not speak to you, that's perfectly fine. Move on and use the next one. That's totally cool. So let's go and start with the export process of the figure. So we need the reference figure and we need the top. We don't really need anything else. So I'm going to go and switch off the eyelashes here, and I'm going to switch off the skirt. I'm also going to switch off the hair, and I'm going to switch off the glasses here at the top. So I'm just going to go right click on them, and they're parented to the head. So that's that. Let me go and switch this over to my smooth shaded view so we don't get any nudity issues here. I'm going to go and hide the shirt as well. So I'm going to hide all these things because this means I can now go and export my figure. It doesn't have to be base resolution because we're not bringing in a morph. We can just export her as high resolution, but just be aware that if we wanted to make a change directly on the figure, we'd have to export her at base resolution because otherwise we can't import the morph back. I don't need to do it here. I can just head over to File, Export, and then pick myself a location. I'm going to go and pick my new project folder, make a new folder inside my exports folder, just so that we don't get confused with so many of these things. I'm going to call that one Blender Exchange, just so that I remember what that is. Inside here, I'm going to save this file as Olympia. I think that was what the character was called. And up comes a dialog here. And I'm going to go and pick the Daz Studio option from here, even though I'm going to Blender, and even though there is a Blender preset here, this one doesn't work. It's for a very old version of Blender and it hasn't really seen an update. So I'm going to switch this over to Daz Studio. And the only two changes I'm going to make here is the scale. I'm going to tweak that from 100% to 1%, and that is because the scale between Blender and Daz Studio is different. So Blender imports things 100 times larger, so I'm going to export my figure 100 times smaller so that it comes in correctly in Blender. On the bottom here, I'm not going to write the surfaces. That's just saves me a little bit of time on export, and I'll hit accept. And that is my Olympia figure exported. Now I'm going to go and control click the little eyeball icon on my character to make basically everything invisible that's parented underneath her. I'm going to go and bring back the shirt also with the control eyeball icon. That's the one. The shirt here, I need to select that and make sure that it is exported at base resolution. So we've talked about the subdivision surface modifier before. I need to head over to the parameters tab and head over to mesh resolution and switch this from high res to base res. And I need to do that so that this geometry is exported at base res, so that when we bring in a change, it can be imported as a morph slider on my object. Those are things that are being taken care of by the Hexagon and ZBrush bridge under the hood automatically. But now that we're doing this manually, we're going to have to, intervene there. That's all I need to do. Same thing again with the shirt selected. File, Export in the same location under Exports Blender Exchange here. I'm going to call this one Shirt. And I can use the same options that Daz Studio will have remembered. So Daz Studio preset 1% on the scale and no surfaces. And we hit accept. That is that. Now let's go and import these two items into Blender. And this might be a little bit of a pain point for many because Blender has so many options. I'm going to talk about most of them. I'm going to show you the basic navigation. I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks that you can use in order to work with Blender. But if you're a beginner here, this might be a little fast for you. So don't be afraid to slow me down with a little gear icon on the player. You can make me talk faster or talk slower. And don't forget to stop the video, keep rewatching it. For reference, I'm using Blender 3.2. That's come out in June 2022. But a new version comes out every 3 months, so the pace at which they put features in and they make changes is rather fast. I'll start by removing the default cube that's in here. I'll just select it and hit X. So selection just happens either in the Scene tab here or just by clicking on an object here. This would be the light selected, this is the camera selected, and this here is the cube selected. So I'll hit X on the keyboard to remove it, and then I'll head over to File, Import, Wavefront OBJ to import my first object, which is the Genesis figure, or Olympia in our case. So on my desktop, under New Project, under Exports, I have Blender Exchange, and I'll import Olympia here. So on the geometry down here, I would suggest under Split, just disable this split by object so that your object remains a single solid object and is not split by material groups. That may sometimes happen and you have like 25 different pieces in your scene. I don't really want that, so I'm not going to do that. Then you can just hit Import and that'll load your Olympia figure. Now, quick viewport navigation basis. In order to zoom in on the selected object, you can hit the full stop key on the numpad. That'll do that. So no matter where you are, if you've selected something in the viewport or in the scene tab, full stop key on the numpad will zoom right into your selection. Now the selection here is orange. If you click off it, it'll go away. If you click on it again, it'll be like a much lighter orange. And that's an important distinction in Blender. I'm not entirely sure why, but this is a normal selection. So often when we make selections like select an object and do something with it, it needs to have this color, not the dark orange color that we saw in the beginning. So often it is necessary to click off an object and then click on it again. One day I'll know why that is. Viewport navigation then. If you want to rotate around the figure, you have to hold down the middle mouse button. So click on the mouse wheel and hold it in and then move your mouse and that'll rotate around your viewport. Likewise, if you hold down Shift and then do the same thing, so Shift, middle mouse button, and that'll pan. And zooming is just scrolling the middle mouse button. That's how that works. So it'll grow on you after a while. I've got my figure in here. Let me go and bring in my garment. So that happens with File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. And that is my shirt. Blender will remember whatever is set here from the previous import process, so you don't have to worry about this again the second time or on subsequent times. And here's my shirt. Now this is the thing that I said. This is kind of the dark orange selection. We don't want that. If I wanted to do anything on my shirt, I need to have it selected with a light orange outline. So click off it and click on it again. And that is the selection color that we need. As I said, one of those things. Just for presentation purposes, I'm going to go and give both my objects a color so that we don't just see light gray here in the viewport. This is completely optional, but it makes your working life a little easier. So I'm going to go over with my shirt selected here. I'm going to go over to this ball icon. That's the material tab. If I just close everything down, I have one material here already. I'll go into viewport display and give my shirt a color. Like something like maybe like a pinkish type color like this. And then I'll do the same with the Olympia figure. So I'll either select her from the scene tab or from the viewport, and I'll give her a color, maybe make her slightly blue, something like that. It just looks a little prettier that way. And you know, there, that's that. Let me show you first how we can make a small change with the Vertex tools, and then we'll do the whole process again using the sculpting tools. So the Vertex tools, they're like what we've used in Hexagon by selecting edges or vertices or faces and making small adjustments. So this is great to avoid poke through or making small changes. Like in this case, let me go and make these arms a little longer here. To get Blender into its edit mode that lets you make these types of changes, you have to hit the Tab key, and then you see that the display changes. You have to do that with the object selected that you actually want to make a change on. So I've selected the wrong one. This was Olympia. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to use the shirt. So in order to do that, I have to get out of edit mode by pressing the Tab key. That'll toggle edit mode, selecting the correct object, like my shirt here, and then I can hit the Tab key. And this is now all the vertices of the shirt selected here. You can also enter edit mode with this drop-down menu. So just click on it and hit edit mode. That'll do the same thing, or tab, that'll just toggle in and out of edit mode. Navigation is the same here in edit mode. And we have, much like in Hexagon, we have a way of selecting either vertices or edges or faces, depending on the use case. And that is up here. So this is now vertex selection. If I switch this over to the second icon, that is edge selection. And we can see that the selection, everything is still selected. It's just now displaying not vertices like this, it's now displaying edges. And the third one is face selection. You can even select all of them together with the Shift key, and then that means wherever you hover, that'll be selected. But we're not going to need that. I'm going to just use the middle one here for edge selection. And much like in the beginning, I'll press A to deselect everything. A will select everything, and A again will deselect everything. I'm going to go and grab an edge loop down here on the sleeve. You can hover over your object and just select any edge you like. Shift will select multiple. You can also press C. That'll paint a selection, so anything that you left click and drag with this circle will now be selected like this. You can do the same with, and then you have to hit enter to kind of confirm that and go back into regular edit mode here. Or you can use the border selection, which is enabled by default. That's just left clicking and dragging out a marquee, and that'll select whatever's inside of it. Blender has a nice way of selecting only what you see. So if I either use the circle or the border selection like this, you can see that everything that was visible to me is being selected. If I look on the back of my figure, those polygons haven't been selected. And that's usually what you want. If ever you wanted to drag a square out and say, well, I'm going to go and select the whole upper body here, and I'd like to have the polygons on the back and the front, you can press Shift Z and go into this wireframe mode. And when you make a selection now, it'll go and select everything that's on the back side as well. But in the solid view, if I do the same thing, it'll only select whatever is facing me and not what's behind me. Just something to remember there. To make an edge loop selection, I can go and not just select one edge like this, I can go and select the whole edge by alt clicking one of these edges, and then Blender is going to try and make that whole loop, much like we did in Hexagon with the L button. So alt select one, that'll make a whole edge loop here, like so. I'm going to use the bottom one, and in order to make a change to this now, I can either use shortcut keys like G, and then just go and drag this down if I wanted to. Or if you're more comfortable with the manipulator, you can select it from here. This is a 3D manipulator for move, for rotate, and for scale. And this is a combined version here. I'll just use this one here, move. And then you can go and left click and drag any of these arrows into any of the directions that you want. They also have little squares here. They will drag both directions. So like the green one here would drag into two axes at the same time. I might not want my manipulator to look like this. So much like in Hexagon, if I were to select something up here, the manipulator, or up here or on the side, the manipulator will always point in the same direction, and that might not be what I want to make my adjustments most efficiently. So Blender also has this concept of saying what does my manipulator need to look at, and we're using the global coordinates right now. That's up here. If you change it to something else like the normals, then it'll point in a different direction. So let me go and do that. You can see now that the axes are different, and depending on where on my figure I click, it'll always point in the direction of the normals here. So this is the one I'm going to use. And then I'll go and make my loop selection again here with Alt selecting an edge loop. And then that's that. Now I can go and left click and drag my blue arrow down. So it's almost working out. I still need to make a little adjustment there, but more importantly, I'm only adjusting the geometry that I've selected. And for elongating arms, that's really not what I want. I'd like to select kind of a soft selection here that we had in hexagon. And Blender has that as well. It's a concept called proportional editing in Blender. And that is happening up here with this little dot icon. Proportional editing enabled means when I move my navigator now, it'll move, well, much more than I had bargained for. It'll move an area of influence that is so large that it's currently not appearing on my viewport. Let me go and hit Control Z to undo that and zoom out a little bit to about here and go and do that again. So left click and drag my manipulator, and now I can see that a circle is appearing that says anything that's inside the circle will be moved by my soft selection. To make that smaller, I have to hold, I basically have to go and left click and drag holding the mouse clicked, and now I need to scroll my mouse wheel. That might require a little bit of practice, but once you've made that adjustment to something like here, you can let go, hit Control Z, and then try again zoomed in. So it's a little bit of a trick that you need to get used to first time you're using proportional editing. So now I can see the outline of my circle here, and I can go and make it larger or smaller. I might be okay with something like this. Now notice what happens when I move this. By default, the side of my shirt moves as well, like we had in hexagon. And the good thing is that Blender has an option to not make that happen. And I thought I'd bring that to your attention because it's a really helpful adjustment tool that's also up here underneath this curve. So we can have different curves of how the circle influences things and all that, but we can use the smooth one here. But have a look at this one here, connected only. If I select that, then only the sleeve will be moved and not the part of the shirt. So I find that very, very helpful. And I can go and move it down like so. And then I think I need to have a little bit of an adjustment here, probably with a little square icon that goes over here. And I think I might also want to have her sleeve flare a little bit at the bottom. And that's also possible with the scale tool. So you can use that here and then scale in 2 axes like so. It'll still use proportional editing. And there, that's a small change to the sleeve made. We'll worry about this poke through at the back in a second. It feels like it's taking a long time to do this, but trust me, when you practice it, you're going to be flying around this in no time. So let me do this again, just with the move tool here, or even with the shortcut keys. I can show you that in a second as well. So it's as easy as selecting this, making sure proportional editing is enabled. Then we go and drag this down to about here. Then we need to maybe control the position a little bit like that. And then we wanted to flare it out at the bottom here a little bit with the scale tool like so. There, that wasn't so bad. Let me go and undo this actually and show you how much quicker this would be with the shortcut keys. So I can go and say G, Z, and then move it down. So you don't have to worry about the manipulator. Much like flaring out now is S, Shift Z in both directions to do that. And then we can go and say G, Shift Z to move it into position, and then you do that. So sometimes you'll see people doing that and you think, how did you do that? Was it magic? But no, that's just once you learn how to work with Blender, it really grows on you, this concept. Now, small poke through fixes, just like I've shown you with hexagon, you can just go click one of those edges here and then probably make an adjustment with your proportional editing tool here. So I've just hit G to bring up that circle, and then I'll go and make sure this goes out like so. Poke through is history. Like so. Same on this side here. You can use edge selection, you can use face selection, it doesn't matter. Whatever the situation calls for, just pull these things out and you've avoided poke through. This one hasn't quite worked yet. There. Okay, so let's say this is my change and I wanted to bring this back into Daz Studio. That is also a manual process, and we have to be on our toes to make sure this works properly in Daz Studio. So hit Tab to exit edit mode, or use the drop-down menu here at the top. And let's export this version of our shirt out so that we can import it as a morph target into Daz Studio. That'll happen by selecting it, much like this with the orange outline here. And then we'll head over to File, Export, Wavefront OBJ. And that will now bring up another file dialog in which we go and put this into my new project, Export, Blender Exchange, and I'll call this one Sleeve Length, like so. So remember when I exported the shirt from Daz Studio, I decreased it by a factor of 100. Well, I have to do the opposite way around now. I have to increase things by 100 so that it looks okay in Daz Studio. It's just one of those inconsistencies you get used to. And the way to do this is with the scale option here. So in Blender, these are float values. They're not percentage values. You have to literally type in 100 and then that's the scale at which you can export from Blender. The other thing you need to do is make sure you limit this OBJ to the selection only. So in our scene, the figure was visible. If this was not ticked, I would combine the figure and the shirt together, and Daz Studio can't import that into the shirt. We need the shirt isolated so that it matches the vertices in Daz Studio. With that selected, there's only one other change that we need to have a look at. Under geometry, down here, there's a super important option that says keep vertex order. In the previous version of Blender, it wasn't there. In the one before that, it was. And now in this one, it's kind of back. So you can see how Blender can be a tiny bit confusing there, perhaps, for users. So we need to make sure this is ticked, because otherwise the morph will be able to import, but the garment is going to explode. So make sure this is ticked. So to recap then, selection only, scale at 100, keep vertex order. That's it. Export OBJ. And that is all we need in Blender. Now to import this back onto our shirt, we can go and head over to Edit, Object, Morph Loader Pro. And this is going to kick off the same script that is being used under the hood by ZBrush and Hexagon when something is being imported. Morph Loader makes that possible. And it's a very handy script, and it's also very powerful. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Just the options are exactly the same as I've explained it for the Hexagon thing. You have to manually select the file you're importing. So that is in my new project under Exports, Blender Exchange. That's the sleeve length. And because we had a morphed character, we can go and switch on the reverse deformations here. Switch that to yes. Otherwise, the morph isn't going to look right. And that is essentially it. Oh yeah, there's a preset that you can check here. Make sure that says Daz Studios. Then we're all on the good side. This one here, primary figure. There's two options here. Leave it on vertex only. It should be there by default, but just wanted to make that absolutely sure. Hit accept, and we see the success message, created morph successfully. So that's good news. Which means now when I head over with my shirt selected to parameters to my morphs, I can see that I have the sleeve length morph. And if I left click and drag that, I can see that my sleeves are being adjusted properly. And that's fantastic. Just like before, I can go into the parameter settings here and set the minimum to 0. And that's my first morph brought in. So very good.